On the 3rd of January 2020, the United States military assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in a drone strike near Baghdad International Airport. It was an incredibly high-stakes act of military force that brought the United States and Iran to the edge of open war, prompted Iran to fire ballistic missiles at American bases in Iraq, and caused the Iraqi parliament to vote to expel US troops from their country. It also happened days after the United States House of Representatives had approved 2 articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump. Now, we're not saying the two things are directly connected, we're just saying that they happened days apart and we're leaving it there. This is a video about the internationally beloved tradition of leaders who are having a very bad time at home deciding that what everyone really needs right now is a war. It's a practice so well documented that academics have given it a name. They call it diversionary war theory, which is a very academic way of describing the most cynical thing a government can do, short of refusing to tax wealthy people again.
We had 111 missiles shot by the Islamic Republic of Japan.
Going back to our favourite whipping boys in historic videos like this, ancient Roman emperors who understood the power of a good piece of misdirection organised gladiatorial games, chariot races and public spectacles with a frequency that wasn't accidental. The Circus Maximus held an estimated 250,000 people, 5 times the capacity of the Colosseum. Incredibly, it regularly sold out because putting on a series of chariot races was actually cheaper and considerably less messy than addressing the structural poverty or political corruption. The Roman Empire's relationship with actual war as a political tool was way more complicated, but still operated in the same wheelhouse. A population engaged in cheering a military triumph is a population not currently questioning why the grain supply keeps shrinking or where all the public money has gone. Emperors whose domestic situations were deteriorating had a strong tendency to find a foreign enemy who needed attending to. Some of those enemies were actual threats, a lot of them weren't. Fronto, the lawyer and teacher who tutored the philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius, wrote explicitly that Emperor Trajan understood that 2 things were essential to managing the Roman masses: subsidized food and spectacular shows. We've covered it before, it's bread and circuses. That this was written by a man educating the next emperor suggests that the strategy was considered not just effective, but entirely necessary. Fast forward to the evening of the 15th of November 1898, when the American battleship USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, killing 266 sailors and Marines aboard. The exact cause of the explosion has never been truly definitively established. However, an investigation ordered by the Spanish government concluded it was an internal accident. The American press, however, led by William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal and Joseph Pulitzer's New York World, concluded it was a Spanish sabotage, and said so in headlines of the kind that would make a modern tabloid editor weep with pride. Destruction of the warship Maine was the work of an enemy, read the Journal on the 17th of February 1898, 2 days after the explosion had happened and before any investigation had been completed. Hearst had already told one of his photographers, "You furnish the pictures, I'll furnish the war." The public clamoured for war with the rallying cry, "Remember the Maine." Congress declared war on Spain in April of 1898. The United States won in an incredibly short conflict, acquiring Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines in the process. And Theodore Roosevelt rode his fame from the conflict to the governorship of New York, the vice presidency, and eventually the White House. When he entered the Oval Office, he was the youngest ever US president at just 42 years old. Those were the days. Subsequent analysis strongly suggests that the Maine's explosion was almost certainly an accident caused by a coal fire igniting the ship's ammunition. The Spanish-American War that followed it was either a real expression of American strategic interest in the Caribbean or a conflict whipped up by newspaper proprietors competing for circulation. The honest answer is probably a bit of both, and the uncomfortable lesson here is that you don't need governments to manufacture wars from scratch if you have a media ecosystem incentivized to manufacture the outrage that makes war seem inevitable. 18 years earlier, in July 1870, the Emperor Napoleon III of France declared war on Prussia. Many in his court, including Empress Eugenie, had explicitly wanted a victorious war to resolve the growing domestic political problems and restore France as the undisputed leading power in Europe. The Minister of War, Leboeuf, who, if you know your French, has a delicious name, declared France was ready for war to the last gaiter button. Whatever the hell that is, I don't think alligators wear buttons. Unfortunately for him, that was a complete lie, and the French were routed almost immediately. Napoleon III was captured at the Battle of Ford Lotus Cortina. Oh, sorry, I got that wrong. The Battle of Sedan on the 1st of September 1870, making him the only sitting French emperor to be taken prisoner in combat. I know, I was surprised too. The Second Empire collapsed within days of his capture. Prussia went on to proclaim a unified German empire in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, which was a point made with considerable historic irony. The lesson of Napoleon III's war is the one that all the other examples in this video confirm. A war launched primarily to solve a domestic political problem is a war being planned by someone whose attention is not entirely on that war. And wars where the commanding authority's attention is not entirely on the war tend to go really badly. The 1982 Falklands War is unique in this particular episode because it contains two governments simultaneously gambling on military conflict to solve a domestic political problem, and only one of them winning outright. In Argentina, the military junta, led by General Leopoldo Galtieri, was facing economic collapse, spiraling inflation, and growing popular unrest against the regime. Scholars who have studied the invasion describe it as a diversionary gamble. Seizing the Falkland Islands, which Argentina had long claimed, would unite the country behind a nationalist cause and redirect public anger from the government towards a foreign adversary. It worked briefly, then Britain sent a task force, and it stopped working. Over in Britain, Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government was, by January 1982, the most unpopular government in polling history. Her personal satisfaction rating stood at a rotten 25%. The Conservatives had been in third place in the polls for almost a year. Unemployment was rising, interest rates were climbing, riots had broken out in Brixton and Liverpool in 1981, and her cabinet was in open revolt. Observers were seriously discussing whether she would be removed as leader before the next election. Then, Argentina invaded the Falklands on the 2nd of April 1982, and Thatcher saw a lifeline. By May, with the remaining Argentine troops about to surrender in Port Stanley, after weeks of fighting a superior navy and air force, Thatcher's personal approval had climbed to 56%. After victory, it reached 59%. The Conservatives' polling went from being in third place to 20 points ahead. They won the 1983 general election with a landslide majority. Thatcher did not start the Falklands War. Argentina did, in a catastrophic miscalculation. What Thatcher did do was use her notorious single-minded approach, something that had often made her look callous in other situations, to benefit her politically. The academic debate about how much of the subsequent polling recovery was down to the Falklands and how much was down to Geoffrey Howe's 1982 budget remains incredibly contested. But even the skeptics of the Falklands factor acknowledged that the war transformed Thatcher's political image from that of a failing ideologue into that of a resolute war leader, and that this transformation was the central political fact of the following decade. Galtieri was deposed and tried for human rights abuses. Thatcher won 2 more elections, and the world got a first-hand demonstration of what happens when you roll the dice by starting an unnecessary war. You either win big or you rot in a prison cell. In 1997, a film called Wag the Dog was released, in which a United States president, facing a sex scandal in the weeks before re-election, enlists a spin doctor and a Hollywood producer to fabricate a war. It starred Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman, and I swear it was satire, not an incredibly accurate prediction of things to come nearly 30 years later, or even the following year. On the 20th of August 1998, President Clinton ordered cruise missile strikes on alleged terrorist facilities in Afghanistan and Sudan. 3 days earlier, he had publicly admitted on television that he had misled the American people about his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. The Sudan facility targeted, a pharmaceutical factory at Al-Shifa, was alleged by the administration to be producing chemical weapons. This claim was subsequently widely disputed, with multiple experts concluding the evidence was inadequate. The comparison to the film was made immediately and by everyone from Republican senators to the press to Kenneth Starr's office. Clinton's approval rating, which had survived the scandal itself with remarkable resilience, took a sharp hit in response to the strikes. The 9/11 Commission later found no evidence that the Lewinsky scandal had motivated the decision, though it acknowledged the affair likely affected subsequent discussions about using force against Osama bin Laden. Incredibly, the satirical film about a diversionary war and the very public comparisons it drew to this incident may have actually prevented a president from ordering the military action against Al-Qaeda that could have disrupted the planning of September 11th. Donald Trump's first administration killed Qasem Soleimani on the 3rd of January 2020. The House had approved articles of impeachment on the 18th of December 2019, several days earlier. Congress had explicitly passed legislation in 2020 to prevent the escalation with Iran following the strike, invoking the War Powers Resolution. Democrats at the time, including Elizabeth Warren, said it was reasonable to ask whether the killing was connected to the impeachment. The Trump administration, as usual, denied everything. Trump himself, according to a Washington Post account from a senior administration official, had argued the strike would be popular politically. He had said he believed Iran wouldn't do anything too stupid in response. Iran responded by firing ballistic missiles at American military bases in Iraq, injured more than 100 U.S. service members with traumatic brain injuries, and withdrawing from the 2015 nuclear deal. In February 2026, Trump's approval rating hit a new low of 41.6%, with disapproval at 55.4%. 2 days later, on the 25th of February, the US and Israel launched joint strikes on Iran, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. A Reuters Ipsos poll conducted in the 48 hours after the strike found that 27% of Americans approved of them and 43% disapproved. Within weeks, Trump's approval rating had fallen further to 36% in a Reuters Ipsos survey. The rally around the flag effect, which had historically given American presidents a temporary boost in the immediate aftermath of military action, did not materialize. The Iranian conflict had produced the opposite of what diversionary theory would predict. The man who had tried to use military action to distract from growing domestic problems, including the unifying issue of the Epstein files, instead found that the military action had created new and much larger, more expensive domestic problems. The thing he had thrown at the problem had become the problem. Vladimir Putin, incidentally, launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, having spent the previous months watching his approval rating slide and his domestic opposition grow, with Alexei Navalny calling daily protests from prison. Academic researchers at the University of Chicago, analyzing over 1.8 million recorded ceasefire violations in eastern Ukraine between 2015 and 2022, found that Russian state media coverage of Ukraine grew significantly more hostile during periods of domestic protest. Diversionary war theory has been studied, debated, and tested by political scientists for decades. The honest conclusion from the literature is that it sometimes works, but most of the time it doesn't. It usually works better for authoritarian leaders than democratic ones, and the military action required to produce the domestic political benefit tends to produce unpredictable consequences that frequently make the original domestic problem look comparatively manageable. The Roman emperors figured this out and decided that bread and circuses was a more reliable tool than actual war, because war has a tendency to go wrong in ways that circuses rarely do. Unless you're Siegfried and Roy, then it's way worse in circuses. Google the incident, but do not watch any videos for the love of God. Napoleon III tried military adventure to solve a domestic crisis and ended the war in a Prussian prison cell while his empire collapsed around him. Galtieri tried military adventure to solve a domestic crisis and was deposed, tried in court, and convicted. Margaret Thatcher didn't start a war to solve a domestic crisis. She responded to one so quickly that it saved her political career. Clinton was accused of starting a war to solve a domestic crisis and may, in the process, have hamstrung the foreign policy decisions that could have disrupted Al-Qaeda. Trump has attempted the same maneuver multiple times with the same country, and every time the military action has produced consequences far more expensive than the problem it was meant to distract from. The people who decide to try this have, despite being surrounded by supposedly the best and the brightest, not been paying close enough attention to what happened to the people who tried it before them, which is, when you think about it, the same problem that runs through every episode in this series. Short-term thinking over long-term planning and execution is always doomed to failure, and sometimes it leads to impeachment. Thank you so much to our paying patrons: Andrew Zavara, Silent Crisis, Suzanne, Ben Marquardt, Noel Marshall, and Annette. If you would like to subscribe to our Patreon and get exclusive early access to all of our videos ad-free, scripts from every episode, a welcome gift when you join, and exclusive content we don't share anywhere else, go to patreon.com/historysgreatestidiots. Until next week, take care now. Bye.